what are the potential consequences of central banks keeping interest rates steady for consumers and businesses in the short and long term?
Well, if you allow me, I like to go a bit Trumpian here, as President Trump says about these federal central banks. He calls them people who have no idea about the economy. They flip a coin to see whether they should increase or decrease the interest rate, and they're always too late. And I have to say, the more we look at it, he is true. And I'm so grateful to President Trump for breaking that taboo that we cannot question central banks. Because if you look at it across the board, the problem with most central banks, or all of them, I would say, is they are non-accountable. They are not accountable to anybody, and they presume that they have the right to do what they want to do. Today, for example, Andrew Bailey, governor of Bank of England, he says he sees big evidence. He is sure that the fall of the inflation is much faster than predicted, but he's not lowering interest rates. And he's amazed. It's listening to these people. Instead of learning, you hardly learn anything. And that's the issue. It's totally, I was listening to the interview, it's totally waste of time listening to them.
Sir, how does holding interest rates affect inflation expectations and overall economic confidence in different countries?
Well, if we look at inflation, the 80% cause of inflation, high inflation, is high energy cost. And then majority of the 20% is high cost of borrowing. So today as Bank of England, they never address the causes. They never mention anything about high energy cost or what we can do to lower high energy costs. What if there are any policies to lower that? And also the bank did not take any responsibility by keeping the cost of money, the cost of borrowing high. They are actually contributing to the inflation. The problem is we have too much information and too much statistics. If you listen to them, they show you like 12 to 15 charts, and none of it makes sense. If you go back 30, 40 years ago, there were just two figures for the economy: the number of house transactions and the number of new car registration every year. That's all was needed to understand the heat, the temperature of the economy. So how many houses are bought and sold every year, and how many new cars are bought. The reason why these two were so important, because the largest items any individual buys is first a car, then it's first is a house, then it's a car. The third one would be weddings. How many weddings you have per year? Otherwise, everything else that an individual purchases is less than £1,000. And that's all you needed. And Gordon Brown, the Labour Chancellor and one of the most successful chancellor, that's what he always talked about, these two figures. But now, in the last 20 years, we have so many charts, none of it, nobody can make any, and every prediction that the Bank of England has made is being wrong. And they sit there with their hands like this, the way they talk like they know all the answers, yet they're not accountable, and they get every prediction wrong.
Sir, in what ways might steady interest rates influence global trade and investment flows amidst ongoing geopolitical and economic uncertainties?
Thank you for that question.
Welcome.
The first thing they have to do is to ditch that 2% inflation target. That 2% inflation target was an arbitrary figure picked in 1998, and they thought that's a good model to keep inflation or target inflation at 2%. In order to achieve that, the number of times that economies around the world have been crashed just to achieve that is done more damages to the growth of economy than is done benefits. And if you look at it, look at China. China never followed that. and their economy in the last 20 years has become the second largest economy in the world. And if you look at it, 20 years ago, 2005, the British economy was larger than China. Today, 20 years later, Chinese economy is 6 times larger because they don't follow those economic models, which we know is not worked before, and yet we follow them. And even today, Andrew Bailey, the governor of Bank of England, say our target is 2% inflation. Now, previous to 98, the target was anywhere between 1 to 4%. If we go back to 1 to 4%, then we wouldn't be in the position we are right now.
How can prolonged periods of unchanged interest rates impact sectors like housing and banking and consumer savings, sir?
Well, let me just throw some figures at you. In 2007, number of houses, house sales in United Kingdom, in Britain, was 1.8 million. 20 years later, where the population has increased by about 9 million. So in 20 years, the population has increased by 9 million. The number of house sales has dropped to 1.1 million. So if you look at it, the population has increased by 9 million, but the number of houses bought has decreased by something like 40%.
You want to say here in this context, sir, that the demand is more than the supply?
Not only, yes, of course, the demand is more than supply, but that's why we have a housing crisis. It's because since 2007, they've restricted, the Bank of England has restricted flow of money and through a layer of government called FCA. And now we have another layer of government called OBR, Budget of Responsibility. So we have these layers of government. All they do, they have no purpose but to restrict the flow of money. And that's why the housing is in such crisis. That's why the car industry is such crisis. Because if again go back, in 2007, the number of new car registration was 2.4 million. Today, 20 years later, is less than 2 million. So, and again, I go back, the population has increased by 9 million. The consumption has increased by 9 million, but it has decreased by that. Again, I go back to FCA and Office of Budget Responsibility, OBR, which in last 20 years, they've created more layers of government, more bureaucracy, and that's why the economy is not going anywhere.
Sir, what challenges the central banks face when balancing inflation control with the need to support growth? And how might this affect future monetary policy decisions?
Well, right now, they're not making any decision. They're just reacting to what is happening. They have some models. They say what we do. But as I said, they always get it wrong. They're always too late. And there is absolutely no responsibility. For example, if a government is not performing, you could elect them out. But the Bank of England governor, he's always there, unless a government or somebody wants to change him. Even President Trump, such a strong president, has difficulty changing the Federal Reserve governor, Jerome Powell. So these positions, these institutions have become so powerful that they're unaccountable to anybody, and yet you can't even challenge them on their decisions.